All right. Hello and welcome to Back to Basics with Sandra and Lyndall. Today we are joined by an incredibly special guest, Miss Zoe, who's an incredibly talented artist. So welcome, Zoe.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yep, so my name's Zoe Raymond. I'm a Yindjibarndi and Pinikura woman, and I'm an Aboriginal artist and have been for a long time, since I was 10. And I've only just stepped into being a full-time artist, which is really exciting. But I live and work here in Brisbane or Meanjin, and this is where I've grown up most of my life.
So amazing. And this is really one of the reasons we wanted to get you on, because I've got you on Facebook and your stories or your posts always pop up for me on Facebook. And I remember reading the post where you left your corporate job. I think it was last year or the year before. And we will get into that a bit later. But I was like, oh God, I wish I could do that. It looks so amazing. And now you're just, exploding and following your dreams, which is really exciting. But, kind of take us back to the beginning. You mentioned that you were a self-taught artist. How did that come about for you?
So I grew up with my non-Indigenous mum here in Brisbane, and my dad was down in Sydney at the time. He is the Aboriginal side of my heritage. And one day I was visiting him, and out of the blue, he was doing these gorgeous Aboriginal dot paintings that I'd never seen him do before. And I remember sitting down with him as he painted for about an hour, and I was just so mesmerized by the process and how it came to life. And pretty much as soon as I got home, I got on the plane back to mum, and I was like, you need to get me some canvases, you need to get me some paints, I need to sit down with my brother and sister and show them this awesome thing. And I was so excited, and not so much my siblings, they gave it a crack. But from there, yeah, I just kind of took it on and kept teaching myself as I went on, and here I am today.
That's amazing. So when did you realize that, you really had a passion for this?
So it was definitely in primary school, and I think, as it's very common in a lot of Australian primary schools, we will have Aboriginal artists be guests. They'll come in and show us how to do things, and being complimented by these guests who are like, oh wow, they would see this talent from me at such a young age. And I remember having this awesome grade 7 teacher who was so nurturing about it, and she was someone who loved art herself, and she would always kind of pushed me to pursue it. I guess I always knew that I had this creativity and a talent throughout high school as well. But it is interesting as an artist, I don't think you see it for a long time. And it was only really in the past couple of years that I realized that, I was quite good at what I did. So it took a long time.
Do you think that's because a lot of the time we're so critical of ourselves and our own work?
Yeah, big time. And I think social media plays a huge part in it, where I've now got this huge community of Aboriginal artists in my circle, and I see them all the time. And I'll do something and I'll be like, wow, that's great. And then something of theirs will pop up and I'll be like, oh my God, they're so much better than me. Which is insane, because then in return, they will just tell me how much they love my work as well.
That's so cool. So, I mean, obviously I would say that your heritage really inspires a lot of what you do. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my family is, most of them are in this small town called Onslow in Western Australia. I've only actually been home once. So my dad was part of Stolen Generation, and he didn't actually find our family until he was about my age, so late 20s.
Wow.
And I'm thankful he found them, because they were a part of my upbringing, even at a distance. And the one time I went home, it's so hard to explain, but as an Aboriginal person, you kind of got this connection to your country, and you get this longing for it. And when I was home, I was so inspired by the landscape and the beautiful colors that come out in sunset, and the red dirt and things like that. And so I took a lot of that inspiration into the colors that I use in my paintings now.
That's amazing.
And you mentioned that your mum's non-Indigenous. Did I hear that correctly before? Yeah. So how, growing up, were you still exposed to, I guess, your heritage, and how did you, join the two cultures together to ensure that you were, obviously respecting both? How is that?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky, because I hear a lot about Indigenous people who grew up with a non-Indigenous parent and they don't get exposure to their culture, their mob, where they're from. For me, my mum has always been very passionate about the Aboriginal community. So I grew up very involved in it. Every NAIDOC event, every Sorry Day, she would take us somewhere and immerse us in that. She would always make sure we knew where we were from and where we belonged. So I never had the feeling of not knowing I was Aboriginal and not knowing what mob I was part of. So I'm very grateful that my mum was that part of it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and it's so nice to see and hear that coming from you, and you blossoming into actually really honing in on that natural ability clearly that you have. And I hadn't heard of you before. Lyndall introduced me obviously to your page and to your art, and I was just blown away by, like, wow, this is just not only are your pieces beautiful, but you can see that it's coming from a really deep place for you. And you've blown up really over the past, how long would you say it's really taken off?
So as Lyndall said, I left my corporate job end of last year, so only in November. And so far this year, I have worked with the St. George Illawarra Dragons on their Indigenous round jersey. And recently I worked with the LV Power Racing team for the livery for their Darwin and Townsville races. And so for me, that's been incredible in my first year. But it really started about 2 years ago, where my sister for a long time was begging me to get on TikTok. I wasn't about it. I wasn't interested, but I started.
I was the same.
Oh my God. And now I'm
really
funny videos. People are so funny, but I just started randomly posting, like time lapses of me doing my art, and some of my videos blew up and I didn't really know what to do about it. And suddenly there's this huge interest of, where can I get your art? Like, where can I buy this stuff? And I didn't have any of that set up. I was just trying to showcase what I did. So in the job I was at in the time in Indigenous recruitment, I just asked my boss if I could go back to 4 days a week, part-time work, so I could focus a day a week on my art. And very quickly I realized that was still not enough. The demand was so big. And then I got presented with an opportunity in Brisbane, and I said, I will take the job as long as I can stick with that part-time. And they were more than happy to do that. And then last year I had a company say that they wanted me as an internal artist and graphic designer. And once again, I said, I will happily take the job, but only on 2 days a week on a salary that I was still getting that steady income. And they said yes. So it was a lot of, I guess, backing myself and making big jumps in people's eyes, but I was always making sure that I had that stability, that income to pay the bills, while I was able to open up the doors to all these opportunities. And like the Dragons was a competition that I entered last year that, only blew up this year. And the car racing was something that happened early this year that has only just blown up now. So it's been a lot of like background work and making moves in private as well.
The power of social media, hey?
Yeah, it's so inspiring. And I guess, like, Lyndall and I are kind of not like on the same sort of path, but I know Lyndall is very aligned to what you're saying at the moment about, just having that stability and also following your passion and following your dreams. And I love that you said you still need to have that stability so that you can it kind of funds your dream, to be honest.
Exactly. Yeah. And for me, I live on a single income, and I have for a long time. So everything that I've had to do in regards to work is making sure that I pay that rent first. That's always like the important part. And then everything else. Yeah.
I hear.
Especially in this economy. So
absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about like Aboriginal artwork. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, a lot of the artwork, they tell stories and things like that. Is that true for like all of the artwork? Does all of your artwork have a story, or, is some artwork created because it looks pretty, or, you know what I mean?
So I'm very strong in that point of view. I'm an artist that won't do pieces that don't have a story or a meaning. I think because I want my pieces to also be educational, bringing in that aspect of traditional storytelling with the symbols, but also bringing in the contemporary side of, the bright colors and things that do look pretty. And I think that you can definitely do both. I do see a lot of artists who just put pieces together that absolutely look pretty, but they don't have a story behind it. And I just feel like that takes away the traditional aspect of why we do Aboriginal art. So yeah, all of my pieces have meanings.
Awesome. So when you're working with a sorry, go.
No, you go. I was just going to say, when you we're so enthralled, as you can tell.
Yeah.
When you sell your pieces, like, do people buy because of the story as well as because of the piece, because of how beautiful it is, or people just buying it usually just because of how it looks aesthetically?
So my demand has been so high that every piece that I've done has been for a client who's come to me for a commission. I really haven't had the chance to do pieces just because and then sell them.
Yeah.
So every piece I've done, my process is to ask the client, what story are you trying to tell? You know, whether it's about a business, you know, I will go on their website, I'll research their business and their story of how they came to fruition. Or if a client wants a story about their family and memories and things like that, I take that story and then I put the symbols together and ask them what color palette they want and then bring it together like that. So generally a client will get an explanation as well. I'll break down the piece and write it out so that any guest that they have in their home or in their business, if they ask what the story is, they can confidently bring it out and just tell them as well.
Amazing.
So beautiful.
Do you have a favorite story that you like to tell?
So I've actually, in my whole 20 years of painting, I've only ever kept one, and it's one that I did last year. And it's in my car at the moment because I packed it up. But it's a story about the time that I went home to country. And I think as an artist, there's a lot of paintings you look at and you're like, yeah, it's pretty, but like it kind of, it belongs somewhere. I don't know, you just get this feeling that it's meant for someone. But this piece, I finished it and I loved it so much, and it was so personal to me that I wanted to keep it. And essentially it tells the story of my family traveling from all these different places. We actually came together for my uncle's funeral, so it wasn't the best circumstances, but when we showed up, you know, my auntie, she had a fresh damper. My cousins had just come home with, you know, fresh couch. They had, you know, lamb, kangaroo, and it was the best feed of my life. And just us coming together and representing the big ant mounds or the termite mounds in the Pilbara and the beautiful sunset that I saw. So it's like pinks and oranges through it. So that piece for me is probably my favorite that I've done, just because it's, you know, a personal one for me to keep.
That sounds so beautiful. So I know we are going to talk a little bit more about moving into business as a freelance artist a little bit later, but you know, for yourself, it hasn't all been kind of sunshine and rainbows. I know you've kind of struggled with mental health and things throughout the year. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think I've definitely had mental health struggles my whole entire life, but I think for a lot of people, you don't realize the traumas you've been through until like your mid to late 20s, which is something I've been going through. And I think the reason why I've been able to grow so much as a person. So when I was 18, I was homeless. At one point, I was kicked out of home. I was couch surfing for about a week or two, and then I was in a homeless shelter for about 3 weeks. And that was like a really low point for me. And then I finally got into housing, and I finally got my license. I got my first car, and things were so great. But I was just hanging out with the wrong people, and I ended up in a domestic violence situation for 2 years at the age of 19.
Wow.
And that moved me to Townsville because he essentially cut me off from my family, my friends, and everything I ever knew. And then at the age of 21, I was in court getting an AVO by myself in a town. Once again, I knew no one, and I was so young. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was so young. And so I was dealing with that. And for me, being homeless and leaving a DV relationship, I was just on survival mode all the time. And I've always been so terrified of going backwards and going back to having no home and starving and things like that, that for me, work just became survival. And I was actually working like 14 days straight. I was overworking myself, but the fear of going backwards was just so high that I was willing to do that. And then through that, I would be taken advantage of in hospitality by managers who just knew that I would always say yes. So I became a people pleaser. I could never say no. And then I eventually got away from Townsville and moved back to the Sunshine Coast, and being between jobs and on Centrelink was just horrific. So I was bringing all my silver coins together just to get the minimum $5 you need for petrol in your tank, just so that I could get to job interviews and job search and all my appointments, just so I could get money. And I ended up finding a job at the very last minute, and there was an issue with my pay for 3 weeks, and I didn't say anything because I was, didn't want to be an inconvenience. And I ended up spending a lot of my lunch breaks and dinner breaks actually sitting in my car, not eating, just waiting for it to be over. So they would think I was off eating my lunch or whatever. But I was starving myself because I was just trying to work to get by. Sometimes I had $1 to go to the Coles and get like a chocolate bar just so that I could like sustain myself and not pass out. But since then, like, work for me has always just been about, making sure that I pay those bills, like I said, because that fear of getting back to that place in my life where I just was starving and homeless, it always plays in the back of your mind even now. So like I said, always having that stability of an income, making sure that you're getting paid is like far more important to me than, being successful and having this career. And I think that's why it's taken me so long to get to where I am, because I always wanted to make sure that I had that stability first and that safety. So going through the DV relationship affected me not just in my personal life, like with relationships, but also in every other aspect. I have a lot of like trust issues. I get taken advantage of a lot because like I'm a nice person, I tiptoe. But yeah, it's been very hard. It's definitely put me in positions where I've been taken advantage of in workplaces as well, because I'm going to bend over backwards to do all these things. And I think it came to a head where I realized I didn't want to work for anyone anymore, because the only person that I could really trust was myself and being my own boss. So yeah, it's been a lot of healing in the past few years. I get therapy. I think a lot of people do, and they're ashamed to talk about it, but I see a psychologist, and she's been so helpful in my journey, and she's actually been a huge encouragement for me backing myself and for me to make these big leaps of, finally living for myself. Whereas previously I would always make sure that I was making sure everyone else got to where that they wanted to be and where they needed to be as well.
Oh, wow. So you were in a DV relationship for almost 2 years, is that right? That's a
Yeah.
long time to go through that. And I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about it, but I think it's really important. Like, you were so young at that time to experience that. Where were your family? Like, did he make you feel that you could not reach out to them and depend on anyone else except for him?
100%. And so, like I said, he physically had me moved to Townsville, and it's so hard to explain to people who've not been in that situation of like, why didn't you just say no? And
Yeah.
I was so like brainwashed by this I want to say man, but he wasn't really a man. He was definitely a boy. I was so brainwashed by him, and he was 5 or 6 years older than me as well. So you think that he knows what he's doing, and I could trust and love him. And there were many times before I even moved where police were involved, and I still ran back to him. And my family kept trying to tell me, that it wasn't right, that, but you don't listen to them at the time. So by the time I moved to Townsville, they didn't really want to talk to me. Sorry. It's a bit hard.
That's all right.
Yeah, so for a long time, they didn't talk to me. So I was very alone.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Did you want to take a break?
So I put tissues here because I knew this would happen. And this is the thing, it doesn't matter how many years it's been, it still brings you right back. And I recently went to Townsville for work for the supercars, so I think that kind of brought up these fresh wounds as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, he certainly did everything in his power to cut me off from all my support systems, so that by the time I finally got the courage to leave him, all I had was me, and the only people I knew outside of him were his friends, or my work friends. But as time went on, because I stayed up there for a little while, I did make my own support network, but I was just you know, I went through the stage where I was just drinking and partying all the time and wasn't doing the right things to heal. But like you said, I was so young, and when people are in their early 20s, they should be partying fun and making these great memories, where I was trying to do these things to forget and kind of like numb myself. And even after I broke up with him, the reason I got an AVO is because he broke into my house and he was threatening to smash my car, like all of these things. So it didn't ever end. So it's been a lot of like healing from that. And I didn't realize how bad that relationship was until the past few years of seeing my psychologist, because it really affected me. So yeah, it was definitely both healing and hard to go to Townsville recently, because I hadn't been there in about 7 years, and going back and kind of seeing these places that like brought up those memories, it was confronting, but definitely going back at this point in my life where I'm a lot more healed and a better person, it kind of helped close that door a little bit as well.
Wow.
Yeah, and huge respect to you as well, for getting help and going to therapy and just being so open about that, because I think a lot of women that are in, whether it's a physically violent relationship or emotionally abused or being abused or whatever, they're scared to get help and move on from that with professional help. They think that they just need to like suffer in silence. So yeah, it's really testament to you and your strength, like internally, that you're able to do that. So yeah.
So how did you build that strength? I mean, you mentioned courage before, like how did that come about after 2 years of dealing with that? I think, you know, a lot of women would be in the same situation as that, you know, even now, like just thinking that they're trapped and this is going to be forever. Like, how did you?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I can't really pinpoint what it is that changed that time, but I went through the same thing. If there would be a fight, and he would manipulate me by crying and saying, it was always this line of, I don't want us to break up, but I know it's for the best. And for some reason, that would always reel me in. But there was this one time where I was just fed up. I was fed up. He wasn't working. I was working. He didn't have a license. I drove him everywhere. I did everything. And I was just exhausted. And I just said, no, like, I'm done. And the next morning he got all teary and tried to like reel me in. And I kind of like looked at him, and it didn't affect me anymore. I actually was disgusted by him. And it was this turning point of like, I physically couldn't even be touched by him. So that made it easy to break away. Like I said, he was the only person I knew in the town. So by the time I moved, he knew where I lived, and that's how we ended up breaking into my new place. So that's one thing I learned, is that I should not have given him my new address. But for me, I ended up joining a gym, and this is where I discovered powerlifting, was back then in Townsville. So I guess a lot of people don't realize that my powerlifting journey started as a result of leaving a DV relationship, because I had so much internal anger, and throwing weights around and just getting sweaty and whatnot, it just changed my life. I went through the 2 years in that relationship being called every name on the sun, being called fat every day and calling this and that. So it does suck that a part of me wanted to go to the gym because I believed it. You know, I was definitely heavier then, but I just didn't feel good about myself. But once I discovered powerlifting and I got to release this anger whilst getting healthy and feeling confident again, it just completely changed my life. So definitely having an outlet, whether it's, you know, therapy or something, physical activity, both together is like absolutely the best thing to do. But I think that the strength to actually leave differentiates with people. So by the time I was in court getting an AVO, I remember meeting this young lady, because believe it or not, there was a man there who was trying to hit on me, and all the cases there were for people, for DV situations. So I know, so she rescued me, and she's got this brochure. She's like, are you okay? And I ended up talking to her, and to me, her story, she was back and forth, and it was hard for her to leave because they had like 5 kids together. So it's definitely a good thing for me that I had no attachments to him in any regard, no kids, nothing. We didn't share anything. So that was a lot easier. So it's hard to say how women can just walk away when there's things like that involved. But I think that that's just this switch that flipped in my brain where I was like, this isn't right, this isn't normal, like I've got to leave. Yeah.
And how is this here? Sorry, go Sandra.
You go.
I was just going to say, like, how has this healing journey kind of like changed you as a person, and has it changed your art in a way?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask if I paint with feeling, and I definitely do. And I think as a creative, there's been times in my life where I didn't touch a paintbrush for like 2 years. I think sometimes it definitely comes from your mental health, and it's like a mood that you're in when you want to be creative. So there will be times, I'm known as a girl, I have trouble with insomnia, and sometimes my best ideas come in the middle of the night, and I'll whip out my iPad and just start putting ideas down. But I think that when I'm feeling most in the mood is when I'm happy and I'm feeling that inspiration, which is why a lot of my artworks come out bright and colorful. But yeah, it's definitely expressed through my painting, and I think I'm generally known as like a happy, positive, bubbly person. So it is nice when people are always complimenting the colors that I use, because it's how I kind of feel internally as well.
And just with your relationships after that relationship, well, how did that affect you, I guess, finding a partner? Are you in a relationship now? Is everything a red flag? How do you navigate that?
See, that's hard, because it's only been in the past few years that I've really known what is right and wrong in relationships, and I've been single this period of figuring it out. So my relationships prior to that haven't been great either. So there were a few since that relationship, and 2 of them I moved for interstate, and that's a no-no. I've moved 3 times for relationships, so it's still the same putting them before me. My last relationship was extremely emotionally manipulative. I know the word gaslighting is thrown around a lot these days, but that was definitely at the core of it. And since leaving, I've definitely found that I know my worth. I know I'm a good person. I think I'm a catch, but it makes it so hard, because now I don't want to like put labels, but I've got a mental health disorder that makes it extremely hard for me to regulate emotions, particularly in relationships. And I've worked very hard at it, but it definitely makes me a bit standoffish and scared to kind of give myself to someone completely because of that, and because of the past history that I've had of, you get love bombed. I get love bombed so easily, and they promise you the world and all this and that. But I think I've become so independent and self-sufficient that a good relationship for me would be someone who is the same, that could love and care for me and meet me halfway, but can have their own goals and dreams and be driven by what they've got going on, because the relationships I've been in has always been about their dreams and me helping build them, and never about my interests or what I want. So it's hard. Dating these days is it has been a roller coaster.
I know, I hear it all from Lyndall.
Yeah,
it has been
it's hard.
It's another episode.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing is for my self-confidence has been brought down a lot, because you work so hard to build yourself up, and then you get into these situationships that last for a few months, and then suddenly they're like, you know what, I'm not ready for a relationship. And
story of my life.
All I ever think is, what's wrong with me? What have I done? Because I will kind of be like, oh, did I come on too strong, or did I like do this or that? And so I've always had to get past the like, am I hard to love, and am I hard to be in a relationship with? So yeah, it's been a journey. I've kind of started to think that like I've got no pressure about if the person I'm talking to, if I'm going to end up dating them or anything. I like meeting new people, so if it's a new friend, that's great. But I'm just so focused on building myself at the moment that when it happens, it happens. But I know that there will be a lot of challenges because of my past trauma and healing. But that's why I get regular therapy. And, I think that men should be the same. I think it's a green flag when a guy tells me he gets therapy, because, men are the same. Men have emotions, and I know a lot of men who have been through similar, you know, women can be the cause for trauma too in relationships. So yeah, it's tough out there.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I was scrolling through your Instagram and I saw that you did a paint and sip class with your art. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in my time, in my previous jobs, particularly in Indigenous recruitment, I've made a lot of connections and friends who will reach out to me when they might want something within their company. And my good friend Nicholas over at NTT Global, he was hosting an event for Reconciliation Week, and he asked if I'd do a paint and sip. And there was actually a lot of behind the scenes back and forth for months about it. And it was the first paint and sip I've done. I've done some art workshops before, but it turned out really great. We had so much fun. I got a lot of great feedback, and I've already had a few of them reach out to me about their companies and interest in my work. But I loved that. The biggest feedback I got was that I made them feel safe and comfortable, because one of my biggest rules in my art workshops is that there is no negative talk. Like, I don't want to hear I'm not good at painting, I can't do this or this and that. So everyone did such a great job, and it was so much fun, and I definitely hope to do more of those in the future.
I think there's definitely a market for it. Indigenous art paint and sip, that would be so cool. That would be so epic. Yeah, look forward to seeing that.
So you mentioned that you left your corporate role and kind of went all in on your business last year. Like, how hard was that decision, and like, when did you know that like this is it, like this is the right time?
Yeah, so this was, I think a lot of it for me comes to, sorry, I keep talking about the hard stuff. So last year in April, I lost one of my good friends to mental health. So he was like my biggest cheerleader. So for me, he kind of taught me how short life is, and to live life to the fullest, and to never doubt myself. So I think the reason I've taken such big leaps in the past year is because I've kind of always got his voice in the background telling me, you know, go for it, you know, back yourself. And so for me, the scary decisions that I've made, I've known that they've been the right ones, because, you know, it's so cliche, but when they say if it doesn't scare you, it's not the right thing, it's so true. I think in your gut, when you know it's the right thing, then it's going to be okay. And for me, the thing is, I know that I've got a great resume, I've got a lot of great connections. In worst case scenario is that I will go back to the 9 to 5. And there's nothing shameful about that. If it happens, it happens. But I don't want to get to the end of my life and be like, wow, I really wish that I pursued my art career, or I wish I did more of this and that. So this year has been so huge because of that. So I've said yes to all these big opportunities and things that could take me all these places. And for the first time in my life, I've actually thought about like my future ahead of like tomorrow, because I spent a lot of my years, particularly my late teens and early 20s, I didn't even think that I was going to make it this far in life. I didn't think that I would see 20, and I'm about to turn 30. So it's been a huge thing for me to like just think about buying my first home and, you know, building a career and stuff. Like, these are things that I never thought of like 5 years ago, honestly.
Oh,
amazing.
I'd love to see you speaking at schools and talking to children about all this sort of stuff. Like, that would be so amazing to hear.
Yeah, and I would so love that too, because for me, I'm so passionate about, so I'm neurodivergent. I don't learn the same way that other people do. I tried uni for like 6 months in a bridging course, hated it. And I knew in high school that I just didn't learn in a theoretical capacity. So all the hands-on stuff, I loved sports, I loved art, I loved dance, but every time I had to do a written assignment, I couldn't do it. I actually almost failed art in high school, which is insane.
That's
right?
crazy.
Yeah.
But it was never about the practical works. It was because I just can't learn the a textbook. If someone shows me how to do something once or twice, I'll pick it up so quickly. And that's why I'm really good in the self-taught capacity. So I've been in jobs where I've had no experience or no right doing them because I'm switched on like that. And I think that schools are so quick to push you to go to uni and to test you in a capacity that's like written and this and that, where you've got all these smart kids sitting there who don't think they're that smart because they can't get through a textbook and can't absorb the information the same way other kids can. So I think that the school system needs to kind of like reassess that, and I think there's definitely some change happening. But I got to the end of high school and cried because my OP score was horrible and I thought that I was dumb. And I thought that I had to go to university to make a life for myself because that's all they push on you. So I would love to tell kids that, you know, not everyone's pathways are the same. I actually wish that I could go back to, you know, high school years and leave at grade 10 because I wanted to get out there and just start building on my life. Whereas I got to year 12 and I did 6 complete subjects as well as a school-based traineeship because the Indigenous liaison officer pushed it on me. So once again, being an Indigenous kid, there's incentives for people to put you under traineeships and stuff.
Oh, of course there is. It's all about the money.
And they would pull me out of my classes to try and put me into tutoring. And I said, one day, do I have to do this? And they said, no. So being pulled out of a class in front of your friends is so embarrassing because they're like, oh, she's Aboriginal, she's going to this like special class. So yeah, I just would love the younger generation to not go through the emotional turmoil I did of thinking I was not smart enough and thinking that my whole future was driven by how I did in school, because that's not true at all. Absolutely not.
It doesn't matter, but it definitely shapes you. It has an influence over your decisions now. So there is learning through all the trials and tribulations, definitely. I mean, I dropped out in like a year into uni. I remember I was doing a project with my team and I looked at them and I said, this isn't for me. And I walked out and I handed in my deferral on the spot. And I went to Europe and I traveled and I did everything, came back and finished like 2 years later. So yeah, it definitely does get drilled into you. So I can't imagine as well. I think, you know, even nowadays, Indigenous students and things, like you get funding from the government to put programs in for people that are Indigenous. So whether they're truly trying to help you or they're just trying to get funding or supported from the government, and you know, you can never tell.
From my perspective, so when I was leaving high school, I actually really wanted to do fashion design, and I looked everywhere for a scholarship that would cover that. And the thing with scholarships for Indigenous people, you will see that they're only for specific categories. So it'll be for education, it'll be for, you know, nurses and things like that. So the government needs to fill these roles to tick boxes, right? So they need more Aboriginal nurses and educators and things like that. So they'll have scholarships for those specifically. But then you've got all these beautiful creatives who are so talented but can't afford, you know, doing a degree at uni, and there's no scholarship that's like an umbrella for like whatever you want to do. There's scholarships for, you know, non-Indigenous people that want to do different things, but it's kind of like trying to funnel us in the direction that's going to suit the government. It's quite silly, but that's the
wild.
government.
School wasn't for me either. I left in year 11.
Yeah.
I turned out fine.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't think that my high school certificate has got me anywhere.
No. So, I mean, in the last 12 months, you kind of have gone like 0 to 100, like you said, and you've worked with a couple of huge clients, as you mentioned at the start. So, like, how did that all happen? Like, how did you, I've seen, you know, on your website, you've done massive murals and, you know, all of that sort of stuff as well. Like, how did that all come about? Is that you pitching to these people or they find you?
So I've never had to reverse market myself, which is insane to me. If anything, sometimes I'm like, please stop contacting me. So it's, a lot of it has actually been word of mouth, and which blows me away. But the murals that I've done were all word of mouth, and like friends referring me to people. The Dragons jersey was a competition I entered last year and I won that. So that was really cool.
So cool.
And the supercars, that was actually a collaboration with the company that took me on 2 days a week. So that was through them as well. So it's been a lot of referrals and word of mouth. I've never put up a post being like, hey, buy my work. Like and it's, every week I'm getting new people emailing me and messaging me. And this is where I've had to be really careful about burning out and taking care of my mental health, because it has been 0 to 100, like you said. And me being still a people pleaser, it's really hard to say no to people. But I am figuring that all out. And I think that's been the hardest part of stepping into business with no qualifications. I'm completely self-taught, is having to learn how to manage myself, and give myself a schedule and be my own boss. You know, you've got to be really hard on yourself, and that's tough for me. But yeah, it's been insane how far my reach has gone, and the amount of people who have messaged me that, you know, I've never met before. So it's been really cool.
Do you have like a favorite artwork or collaboration that you've done?
Definitely the supercars. So the Dragons are so cool, but I think that the supercars is so niche, and they've done the Indigenous round. This was their 3rd year. And there's only a small amount of artists who have had their art now on a supercar. So
how long did that take you?
The design itself, I worked on it back and forth over a couple of months, I think. So we were talking with the Dick Johnson racing team from the start of the year. So there is a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into everything when it comes to these big collaborations. But when it came to like the wrapping and all of that, so the sign writer said it took 100 hours of printing my design. So me doing the design seems like the easy part. So I was so grateful for the sign writer. He did such a great job, but it was such a huge team effort. But it's always, months and months of back and forth. And I had to, you know, pitch to Viva Energy, who is Shell, and make sure that everyone was happy across the board. So it's a lot of meetings and showing everything and, you know, the meaning and all of that. Yeah.
Do you feel like since you've kind of stepped into your own business and your own freelance career, like 100%, do you feel like that's given you more confidence and like maybe helped a little bit on the healing journey?
It's actually, funny enough, it's opened a lot more wounds. And that's, I think for me, what I realized is that when I was in the 9 to 5, I was just, like I said, in survival mode. So waking up, going to work, getting home, eating, going to bed kind of thing. Whereas now, being a freelancer who is at home most of the time, I sit in my thoughts a lot. So you get a lot of the self-doubt and the anxiety. My anxiety has been like the worst it's ever been, particularly going to big social events and traveling. And I think this is where it's really important to have a support network. So one of my best friends, she knows how I can get after a big event, because you get this big rush of dopamine and this fun time where you're like, it's so unbelievable. She will give me a couple of days after I get home, and if she doesn't hear from me, she'll reach out and be like, hey, are you okay? And I'll be like, well, no, because you go from these really cool things to back to reality, and you're sitting in your own thoughts, and it's been a pretty vicious cycle, but I'm learning, and I'm being open with those I'm close with and letting them know how I'm doing. But it's not as everyone would see on social media, and that's another thing about social media. It's not always as it seems. And yes, I've never been more successful and my art's never been so big, but I've actually had more of a hard time with my mental health in this time because of, you know, I feel like it's a lonely journey in a sense. I'm aware that I'm very supported and loved, but when it's just you in the business, it's like, it feels like a lot. And I think because it's been such an awesome experience, it also feels so unreal to me that every day I have to wake up and remind myself that, like, nope, this is what you do now. Like, this is your job, this is your life. And it's also being careful of trying not to blur the lines of my love and passion for art and it becoming a chore and a job that I just don't like, that I resent. So it's been a lot more hard work than any previous job I've had, that's for sure.
And how do you separate that? I think that's a really interesting point, like, because, you know, when you're able to monetize your passion, it does get really hard to not fall into that. How do you kind of keep that separate?
Yeah, and that's a tough one that I'm still learning. Like I said, I've got this bad habit of, you know, late at night, I'll sometimes get those surges to be creative, and I'll have to tell myself no, like trying to keep myself within like a 9 to 5, and tell myself that after hours is, you know, downtime and weekends and stuff. But it's so hard when you're like driven by the stuff, and your creativity can come at strange times. I still make sure that my weekends filled with friends and family catch-ups, and making sure that I'm shut off, I'm not answering emails. But I've also found that transparency with my clients has been really great. It was a bit terrifying at first, but I've had times where I was just all in my head and my art wasn't coming out how I wanted it to. And I've emailed the client and said, hey, can I just extend this deadline for a few days or something? It's just not the vision that I want. And I don't want to give my clients something I'm not proud of. And they've all been completely okay with it. So transparency is definitely important. I'm still learning how to relax and shut off. I'm very bad for that. And I think,
well, if you find out, please let me know too.
Yeah. And I think because I've spent so much of my life being in that survival mode and that, you know, fight or flight feeling, it's so hard for me to, like, you know, not blur the lines between art being something that was like a stress reliever for me to now being like my income.
Business,
so
yeah,
it's a hard thing. But recently, when I got back from the supercars, I had this, like, you know, that feeling to do a painting, because I'd been doing digital work so long. And it's actually that blue painting behind me. I did that across like 3 nights, and it just kind of like flowed out of me, and it felt so good to just sit down. And for me, you know, I can sell that, absolutely, but it was also like such an outlet for me. So, and I think that's when you produce your greatest work, is when there's no expectation of we need it by now and, you know, this and that. But you know, it is business.
And what's the story behind that one? What's the story behind that?
That one's literally just a bunch of symbols about water. So I think for me, growing up on the Sunshine Coast, I've always had this love of water. I actually have a fear of drowning, funny enough. So for me, I think water is so beautiful and so intimidating as well. Like, it's just this
powerful.
It's so powerful. So
yeah,
so it represents like the different ripples that like the ocean makes, and it's got some sandy colors in there, just about water. But I also listen to a lot of like water and rain sounds to try and help with my insomnia.
Yeah, you're like a little mermaid.
Yeah, I think, you know, there was this place I lived on the Sunshine Coast that was right near the beach, and I would keep my window open at night and I'd hear the crashing of the waves. I was that close. So yeah, there's just something so soothing about it, but also it terrifies me. Like, big amounts of water terrifies me too. So yeah, I just have a huge fascination with the ocean. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to other women like looking to follow their dreams, or maybe even create art, or even create their own business?
Yeah, so I think that we keep coming back to stability. I think that whatever your passion or your hobby is, you need to make sure that it's viable. That, you know, for me, I've been doing art for like 20 years. I know that it's something that I'll continue doing for a long time. I know there will always be some kind of interest in it. So it's something that would work in a business model. So something that, you know, that's going to sustain you for a long time. Making sure you can pay your bills first is so important. You know, if you've been in a job long enough that you feel comfortable asking to go part-time and making up that time and gradually stepping back, that was really good for me and my business. And just not being scared to back yourself. I think that's actually a big thing I got from my psychologist. She kept telling me to, you know, you need to start backing yourself. And that's where things really changed for me, because of that self-doubt in your head, and just believing not just your thoughts on how good you are at whatever it is you do, but when your friends and family are always telling you how great you are at that, you just got to believe
them. Yeah.
Yeah, because for a long time I didn't. But yeah, just honestly taking leaps, as long as you've got that backing and stability, like you'll be fine. And like I said, worst case scenario, you can always step back into the workforce. Like there's nothing shameful about it, and it can go back to being a hobby. But at the end of the day, if you don't try it and don't see if it works out, then you're probably going to regret it.
Such great advice.
Okay, so I'm leaving the meeting room and I'm going to go quit.
Definitely not encouraging to quit, but
she's inspired now.
I've booked a meeting room at work, so we're one step ahead.
So tell us what's next for Zoe.
Yes, so I am actually doing another collaboration with another sports team at the end of this year.
So exciting.
Cannot yet announce it, so I'll let that sit on everyone's minds, but very excited about that. Like I said, there's going to be months of back and forth like there already has been. We've got some big ideas in mind, so it's going to be awesome. Should be announced within the next couple of months, I hope. That always depends on like the higher ups in the team. Otherwise, I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks to be signing on with an agency who is going to help me in the reverse marketing and other things with potentially big clients as well. So just kind of just going along just as I've been doing and just, you know, doing what I do.
Taking it to the next level.
Yeah, but also really making sure that I'm keeping my mental health at bay and that I'm giving myself the rest. So I have a lot of personal things and events happening in the next 6 months, and I really want to enjoy them without the stress. So I'm not taking on any new clients for the rest of the year. I've told myself I've already got things lined up that I'm excited about that'll sustain me. But yeah, just being able to enjoy life. But there's definitely some big things coming that I can't talk about yet. But
we'll have to get you back on in 6 months so you can tell us all about it.
Yeah,
for an update for sure.
Yeah, 100%. All I can say is there'll definitely be another jersey that people can buy. So
exciting! Everyone's heard it here first. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Zoe. Like such an incredible story. I feel inspired. I'm probably not going to go and quit my job like Sandra is, but
look, we can all quit and work together. We can
yes, deal.
Let's do that.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening into our chat today. We're going to pop all of Zoe's links below so you can find out all about her. Go and check out her art and follow her on her socials as well. But until next time.